Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Starting to see some of you come in. Okay, our webinar today is on creating a recipe for integrated student support, cultivating the key ingredients to be effective, and ensuring you feature your school secret sauce in your integrated student support programs. That secret sauce may be a key aspect that defines your school culture. It could be a commitment to student support in your mission statement. It could be about the type of students you serve or the unique talent that is on your team at your site. My name is Patricia Gagnon, and I am the Chief Experience Officer at IntelliSpark and one of the co-founders, and I'll be hosting today's session. As we await all of the attendees, we've got a great mix of folks coming from around the country, a nice mix of independent schools. I'd like to ask if you would take a moment to enter into the chat any specific focus or challenge that you might have in mind that you're trying to focus on this coming year as you enhance the work of your integrated student support efforts. And I do want to note that we recognize people are everywhere on the spectrum in terms of integrating and integrated student support programs. You might just be at the start of this journey. You may be fine-tuning a well-oiled machine, although that's not what we often hear. But we recognize you're in many different places. We'd love to see in the chat what are some of those key areas that you may be trying to focus on? We are leaving the chat open today so that you can actually see what everyone has to say. And this will be very helpful to enable our panelists to keep in mind what some of those key areas of focus are. I'll just give you a moment for that. I'm not sure I'm seeing anything in the chat there. What I'm also going to do is I'd like to push out a quick poll because we'd like to know from our audience today. Thank you. Great to start seeing some tracking communication with families, finding space for effective wellness programming within an already packed school schedule. This is great. Thank you. Continue to add areas of focus that you have. What I'm also going to push out is, as I mentioned, a quick poll because we recognize that there may be folks on the webinar today who represent a lower school or maybe the middle school or the upper school or maybe some combination thereof. And we would like to just get a sense of what areas you in particular may be supporting. And it could be a combination. So please feel free to reflect all that apply. Okay. It looks like so far we've got the largest percentage focused on upper school, 75%, middle school, 67, and lower school, 47%. And that seems to be holding pretty true. And so I'm sure many of you are a combination thereof as well. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And again, feel free to continue putting your areas of focus in the chat. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. We're at 73% upper school, 68% middle school, and 46% lower school. And I will share the results right there. Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's get started with our agenda. First, we'll start with some quick introductions, and then I will ask our panelists, Frederick and Bridget, to share the key ingredients and secret sauce that reflects the program they are building at their respective schools. Next, Bridget will also describe how Packer Collegiate in Brooklyn, New York, has adapted the MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support model that is often used in public schools to reflect their integrated student support model at Packer. This will lead into a discussion of how Packer and friends are using IntelliSpark to scaffold and systematize the strong work of their integrated student support programs. We invite you to put questions for them in the Q&A as we go, and we will aim to address those questions during the Q&A session to follow. If there are some we can answer as we go, we will certainly do that. Separately, as I mentioned, we invite you to put commentary in the chat as well. I'm sure some of you will have thoughts or reactions to some of what Frederick, Bridget, and others may share. Before introducing our panelists, I do just want to share that while Frederick and Bridget will be sharing how IntelliSpark has helped them implement their programs, and it provides some of those figurative tools for the kitchen. This essential work around integrated student success really does require a vision for a desired outcome and a combination of key ingredients. This is about so much more that they were doing before they found us and we found them. And those key ingredients could be professional roles that are in the mix of your systemic elements, such as teams, meetings, specific supports, specific plans. This mix of ingredients is likely an evolving one for each of your schools as the dynamics of education and student success are evolving from year to year. And we appreciate that all of you in attendance, as I said, are likely at various stages in evolving your integrated student success programs. We bring this webinar to you today in the hopes that you will be inspired and further enabled by hearing about the evolution of others' programs, as we have been inspired and impressed by the vision and approach of Friends and Packer. You will see that they have also shared their contact information and invite your follow-up if you do have additional questions for them after today. Okay, so let's dive right into introductions. And I'm going to start with you, Bridget. If you could share a little bit about yourself, the location and size and grade served of Packer, and maybe what makes Packer a unique community.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name's Bridget Lande, and I have a clinical background, first and foremost. I have a background as a registered nurse, which got me excited about health education. And I worked in an emergency room, which got me interested in moving to the preventative side. So I got a master's in public health with a focus on health education. I work at Packer Collegiate Institute. We're in Brooklyn, New York. We're a pre-K through 12 school, so we have pre-K 3 all the way up to 12th graders, and we have about 1,100 kids on 2 campus sites. I think that our special sauce is that we have a long history of health education and centering health of students. And more recently, our current head of school was previously a head of school in Denmark and really brought in, kind of doubled down on our efforts to make sure that student wellness was a central part of our vision statement as well as our student programming.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Bridget. Over to you, Frederick.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor by training, and currently in the midst of writing a dissertation. And I work as the director of student services at Friends Central School. And I would say that, one of the things that, we're going to be talking about in a few moments is kind of the evolution of how programs are created, and whether we're talking, more than a decade or 5 years, just how quickly that evolution can happen and how we can support that evolution with information. And that, I think, will be the focus of what we're talking about today, is how both relationship, communication, and information come together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frederick. And just very quickly about myself, my name again is Patricia Gagnon, and I was a Rhode Island public school teacher, Latin and English teacher, and administrator throughout the 90s. But I've been working in the area of education solutions probably for the last 15 or so years. And I joined Steve Smith and Sean Fanning, who were co-founders of a product you may have heard of called Naviance, which they created over 20 years ago. And we were together back in our Naviance days, and we realized that, um, it was so important, of course, to be helping students plan for their future and to have a holistic view of who they wanted to be and where they were in pursuing those plans. But we could see that um, it was absolutely critical to know how students are doing right now, because those plans will not come to fruition unless a student is in a good place right now holistically, and that everyone in that school working with that student is on the same page about where they are and where they want to be and in the best place to move forward. So we created IntelliSpark in order to ensure that the entire team within a school could know the story of that student today, how they're doing from day to day, to make sure they are ready to pursue those future plans. And that's really where we are inspired by the work of schools that are doing this work so well. And they have informed how we have designed this solution. So I'm very excited for you to hear about fantastic integrated student support programs, and how our goal is to make that work as efficient and effective as possible. Okay, so we're going to start in. This is a lot of information, but I want to say that we are going to share these slides with you after. And so if you can't take all of this information in right now, you'll have a chance to kind of dive into it once we send all this information out following today's webinar. I'm going to start by asking Frederick to talk through their respective program of integrated student support at Friends, outlining some key ingredients, their special sauce, some obstacles in the kitchen, and the ideal evolution that they're focused on for student support. Over to you, Frederick.
Thanks, Tricia. So you've clearly all noticed so far that we keep using, this metaphor. Tricia, that former English teacher, is we're all right. We're probably going to whip this. We're going to knead it. We're going to bake it, roast it. I don't know. Hopefully, not overcook our metaphor here. So, when I'm thinking about student support at FCS, I think, of course, that what's the most logical place to start is with our school's mission and vision statement, and I'm very proud of the institution where I work, and I love the simplicity of its mission statement, but simple in the best sense of the term. So, to cultivate the intellectual, spiritual, and ethical promise of our students, mission statement, right? In a lot of ways, very doable. Um, to awaken courage and intellect and peacefully transform the world, a bit more weighty in terms of what we're after. So when I got here, I had a good sense. This was 10 years ago. I had a good sense of like, okay, I can understand certainly the intellectual. I see the spiritual, um, but I had a harder time understanding, this way that we peacefully transform the world. So it was important to me that I found a way during my time to find ways to scaffold that and to pull this out. So the use of a system was really important. Now, for all of you in non-Quaker schools, we are a unique brand, if you will. And I think that a lot of independent schools that come from a tradition share this unique way of doing of work. And one of those, a couple of them here that I have talking about is this expectant waiting, continuing revelation, and of course the unbelievable feat of gathering together children and adolescents in silent worship. I mean, just imagine 500 14 to 18-year-olds sitting in a room in silence, feeling moved to speak. It's a pretty remarkable thing. So it reflects, I think, a unique approach to education and how do we find a way to find fidelity to our mission and vision, and that's the challenge. So when I think about integrated student support, I think about, in a lot of ways, the specific professionals in each division that work on the overall team of all three divisions and in each division itself. And so in my lower school, the people that identify as being on a student support team, myself as the director, our school nurse, a principal and an assistant principal, one admissions representative, which is very unique for us this year, is having someone who is consistently meeting with those of us that are currently working with students who was part of that family's journey at the very beginning. And that has been a pretty interesting improvement on integrated student support. Certainly a counselor, and this year we have several learning specialists. We've split the role um, into two part-time roles instead of one full-time role. We usually have a graduate intern in the lower school. In the middle school, it's a tighter team, and it's a different environment. So, three grades in our middle school, again, it's me as the consistent person, another nurse, a principal and assistant principal learning specialist. But here we have this role of the lead advisor and the advisors as a growth from, say, a lead teacher in lower school. In upper school, it gets a lot larger. Without a doubt, the amount of cooks in the kitchen is quite challenging, particularly in terms of communication. So those that see themselves in a student support role, which of course in theory is in fact everyone, but there are people that spend more time very specifically working on that recipe. Myself, the nurse, uh, three counselors, a learning specialist, a dean of students. This is a new role for us. We have an associate athletic director for student athlete well-being who is a clinician, an international student coordinator, grade deans, an individual, ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th, four separate people, plus all of the students' advisors. So that cooks in the kitchen idea was pretty complicated to manage, and one where we kept really running into a communication issue that we needed to resolve. So that communication issue was one obstacle. Another one was really human dynamics, and what we have here is the way we used to do things versus the addition of student support professionals and that being a growing team has left some folks, particularly people who have been at FCS for 20, 30, even 30 plus years, where their role has changed, where in a lot of ways they were a first responder, frontline person for student interactions, and that has shifted, some would say has been professionalized. So that that has been one of those challenges too, but also information and layers of access to information has also been one of the major obstacles for us. And we needed to find a way to navigate that, but also to express why there are various levels of access to information for
Mm.
students.
Mhm. And Frederick, if there is a question in the chat for you, how many students are in your school? And I think you may have touched on what's the mix, lower, middle, upper, if you can break that down.
Sure. I think we have just over 400 in our upper school. We're somewhere in the 200s for middle and in the high 100s, almost 200 in our lower school. Um, I think really quick and dirty math here. I think we are definitely over 800 students.
Thank you. And Frederick, just a quick question before I ask if there are questions from there's a question. Can you talk a bit about your advisory program?
Sure,
Sometimes
sure.
it's helpful for people to understand the structure and how that compares to their approach and then who has what roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So advisory begins in sixth grade for us. Students in our middle division have a new advisor every year, but advisory happens every single day, structured part of the school day in middle school. In upper school, homeroom, of course, well, homeroom happens in middle school as well, but homeroom begins the day with your advisor in upper school, and then there is a return to advisories on a regular basis. Certainly one whole 40-minute period a week dedicated to advisory, but there are times when we use that structure or system before assemblies, before meeting for worship, with affinity groups and affinity spaces. We both use advisory and break up advisories and twin advisories. Our advisory programming or curriculum is largely influenced by the Institute for Social Emotional Learning and training that many of us have received there. But I would also say that our curriculum is, I'll just keep killing this metaphor, is a smorgasbord of options for advisors to choose from. Very rarely, although we do, um, say this is what we're going to be doing today in advisory. Normally, there is a wide range of choices depending on that advisor, that advisory, and what we want to do. But we are aiming for a real mix between social emotional, traditionally understood, content driven things, but also not sacrificing fun. So by making fun, and I really mean this, fun with a cap with an exclamation point, being part of advisory is really important, and giving teachers permission to have fun with young people
Right.
is really, really important. So one of our greatest sources for fun in advisory is Instagram. And there are amazing games and things that teachers are sharing on platforms like Instagram that help our teachers to try and create new things. We also do that with, in the upper school, juniors and seniors, 11th and 12th grade students support our 9th and 10th grade advisors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Frederick. And to answer your question, we will be sending out the slides, and you will also receive the whole recorded webinar. You will have the full enchilada on which to feast after today.
Oh my God.
That one just came out naturally. All right. Must be hungry. Okay. Thank you, Frederick. And over to you, Bridget. I'm going to let you share your recipe
Sure.
with the crew. If I can just, there we go.
Frederick, I'm interested in hearing more about that associate AD role. I'm going to follow up with you on that.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so there's a lot of similarities and then a few very key differences between Frederick and PAC's program. And so one of our main things that we just share with parents, to Juliet's point earlier about family buy-in, is we really started a few years ago to message that you cannot separate academic success and student wellness. And we believe as a school that they are inextricable, and that everything about our school program and design is that we are an academically rigorous school. Kids are getting an excellent education. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to prioritize their emotional, social health and their emotional intelligence. And so it has, over the past few years, really become a differentiating factor or a branding factor for Packer, our robust health and wellness program, and how deliberate we are in weaving that into every aspect of the school. So I think some specific ingredients are that my role is on the senior leadership team. So I sit on program leadership, I sit on operational leadership, academic council. And so in these sort of high level, big picture decision-making meetings, it is my job to represent wellness of students and make sure that that concept is always part of the conversation. We have a team of 17 between our health educators and our clinical team. So in our structure, as the director of health and wellness, and this was actually my predecessor's sort of vision. It's both health education and our clinical team, which is 3 school psychologists, 3 counselors, and then our nurses. We do a tremendous amount of adult education. So not only among faculty, this kind of came out of the fact that we were doing a lot of consent education with kids. And after, I mean, it was like after quite a few years, we realized that our kids had a much more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of it than our adults. And this was causing problems in the classroom because teachers weren't as familiar with the language and sort of the protocols or the culture around asking permission before touching someone's computer or going in for a hug. And so we started doing this training with teachers as well. And then, of course, we were like, oh my God, we have to do parents. And so when we started our lower school health program, we did a parent education that was literally called Gender 101. This was like 8 years ago. And we were teaching them the same things we were teaching second graders. And so as we discovered sort of the robust program that our kids were getting, it was like, wait a minute, we as adults, certainly adults my age, we never got that education growing up, right? How can we bring everybody up? So there's a big parent and teacher piece to this as well. And then post-pandemic, so I work very closely with our director of student support, who runs our learning support program, and then our equity and inclusion as well. And then we have a director of academic tech. And what we say is there's no competing agendas, right? All of these things create a holistic experience for kids. And so we are always working together all the time to make sure that all aspects of our support programs are woven into the entire program. So we did a strategic reboot in 2020, which was a lot at that time. And in 2021, we added wellness to our mission statement. Um, and then the obstacles were that our student support team structure looks very similar to Frederick's. There's quite a few people in there. And how are we basically, teachers wanted to know what happens behind that closed door. People are talking about my kids, my students, or I noticed something about a kid and I raised a concern. And then what's happening behind the student support team door and what are the interventions that are happening. And so we were having a real issue trying to keep teachers in the loop in an appropriate way, like respecting privacy, and therefore tracking intervention efforts, right? Are we seeing progress with kids? And so we have tried over the past few years, we've tried multiple things. And then when I heard about IntelliSpark, we decided to try IntelliSpark. And it has solved a lot of problems, and we're going to talk about that later. And our evolution was that we started with a health ed program about 15 years ago in 2008. And then 4 years ago, the role of Director of Health and Wellness was created. And it was not only curricular, but then we also pulled in the clinical team.
Thank you very much. Any specific questions about the structure or this impact of adding wellness to the mission statement for Bridget? And we can certainly, again, as I mentioned, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A as well. And our aim is to have time for you to ask some of those questions as we go. Okay, so I'm gonna keep us moving along just so we do have time for that discussion. And so what Bridget was going to share is, we at IntelliSpark work with partners in the independent school space, in the public school space. And many of you may have heard of multi-tiered systems of support, which is, a model much more commonly being implemented right now in public schools. And so Bridget's going to talk a little bit about how they've adapted what that MTSS model is to the work that they are doing at Packer, having a health and wellness focus and commitment. And so I'm going to start with that, Bridget, if you would.
Sure. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with this, on the left is sort of the MTSS model that a lot of public schools use. And they typically call them tier 1, which is where it says all, tier 2, which is some, and tier 3. And something that students are getting just as being sort of students in the school, right? These are a lot of classroom interventions, differentiated education going on in the classroom. And then some would sort of typically be kids being pulled out for learning support or emotional support. And then few would be intensive interventions. And so they have the sides being academics and behavior. So when we were thinking about what does this look like at Packer, I thought, well, I don't want to put behavior because it's actually not a lot of behavior issues, right? Like because we're an independent school, we know our kids really, really well. We have small classroom sizes and a really big support team. We can actually trace a lot of what would typically be called behavior issues to actually social, emotional, family, something going on, right? Like what is the root cause of it? So we changed it to wellness. And when we think of the bottom, what do all kids get at Packer? And so that would be like a great classroom education, our advisory program, affinity spaces that are available to them, right? Chapel, things we do to build community. So all students are going to get that all the time. And then when we think of this tier two, what are some kids getting? That could be any sort of learning support or push and support even, right, for a math support or a writing support class. That could be time with our counselors. And in our sum category, because we've been collecting data on this for 3 years now, this could be, we have a lot of kids who come in for one thing, right? They're totally overwhelmed and they go to our learning specialist. Here, we don't need an IEP or you don't need a learning plan to meet with a learning specialist. And you can say, it's crunch time. I'm totally overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. They help you with your planner, they plot things out. That could be your one-time thing. Or it could be a counselor. I just went through a breakup. I'm totally overwhelmed. I can't focus in class. To kids who are having check-ins with these people on a regular basis, right? So there's a wide range of how people access that sort of sum. And then few for us is mostly out of school referrals that our teams, that these two student support and health and wellness teams are making to outside tutors or psychologists or psychiatry or therapists.
Mhm. Um, I'm going to ask one of the questions. This design and the health and wellness piece, Bridget, how much of this was your proposal? And I'm going to ask Frederick the same of you with your programming. How much of this was your proposal to your head of school versus the head of school kind of saying, this is what we're going to do? What was the mix of how your programs have come about?
Hmm.
So I have worked under two different heads of school. And when I came on, we already had a very strong health program. And our, at that time, the role was the department head for the health education team. She had a very close relationship with the head and was called in to make sort of a lot of decisions around health crises or health policy, stuff like that, right? So we already had this foundational piece. When our new head of school came, she came from a school in Denmark. And she was really, really passionate about the idea that wellness was central to a student's experience. And so there was not a lot of convincing that had to happen at that point, but there was a lot of collaboration and thinking about what does this actually look like? How do we get buy-in, right? And so that's where we sort of did the research on academic excellence and centering student wellness and student identity and all of those things, sense of belonging, how much all of that impacts their ability to be their best learners. And so I would say it was a little bit of both, but I feel very lucky that our entire senior admin, every single division head is all in on the wellness. Like it's really a central part of our school brand.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Frederick, how about at Friends?
Yeah. I mean, just to kind of talk about where Packer is comparatively, is that I would say there's some integration at FCS that really still needs to, in my view, still needs to happen.
Mhm.
So, sexuality education at Friend Central has been here for a really, really long time.
Mhm.
We probably have, all right, I'll try to humble my pride for my colleague and friend Al Vernacchio here and say we have one of the most well-known human sexuality educators in the country, who has really created an extraordinary program. But how did that happen? And from the point of view of Juliet's question, bottom up, top down, um, you know, a sexuality curriculum. How did that start? I mean, it started because Al was an English teacher who got his master's at Penn in human sexuality and wanted to do that work. And so, in addition to teaching English, he started a human sexuality curriculum for grade 9 students. And we're talking 30 years ago, right? So over time, and now he is the coordinator of consent and sexuality education at Friend Central. And his role, along with Quaker Quakerism and Quaker school life belong to our Department of Diversity, Equity, Belonging, Inclusion, and Justice. So there's a place where bridges between student support, well-being, wellness from that more mental health and need to connect, and then yet another bridge because peculiarly to me, health as a class in both our lower school, in our middle school, and our upper school belong in our athletics department.
Mm.
And so there are these silos, these departments that we have around a broader umbrella around student well-being that we need to find continual ways to bring together, and not be as separate. I mean, we collaborate, but are we maximizing our collaboration? I don't think we're there yet, right? And so Bridget mentioned one of those initiatives was creating an athletic director for student athlete well-being. Um, that person was part of my team and then went into that role. So in some ways, our bridges are specific people.
Mhm.
um, and we speak, sometimes we speak some different languages in our professions, right? So teachers have a certain way of talking, and independent school teachers sometimes have a very different way of talking than, say, people that were our public school teachers.
Mhm.
Um, and then, of course, myself as a clinician, and then my nurses, like we all have different ways of talking about things. So also getting to understand each other's vocabulary is pretty important.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say very little, going back to Juliet's question, has come top down at Friends Central in probably the most Quaker of ways. Most of our initiatives, including even things that students have asked for, right? Students have created most of our wellness and well-being clubs, including students that identify as neurodivergent, right? So our neurodiversity um, club is really student driven.
All right.
And I'll just say, sorry, Patricia, to one of the questions I saw earlier, um, I hear a lot from people like, how do you make wellness a priority, right? There's never time in the school schedule. Where do the resources come from? We need a bigger team, all of these things. And what I say is like, here we're kind of maybe preaching to the choir, right? And it really is the people who are making the budget decisions and the scheduling decisions.
Mm.
But the sad truth is that God forbid a school have a suicide or a death by alcohol poisoning, then people start putting resources towards it. And it's really helping people shift to that preventative model of how can we start getting ahead of these things by following national trends or collecting data in our own school to see what the highest risk behaviors are. And then how can we make targeted interventions, which are going to be around health and wellness, obviously health education, sense of belonging, creating community. And so I think that some of that, if you are in a place where you're trying to get buy-in from leadership, I
Mhm.
think that I would start, it's basically advocacy work that, in the very budding
Mhm.
stages of this, you are the one who is doing the research and building the argument and sharing why putting in a preventative effort is actually much stronger for your school. Not only obviously for student wellness, but also when a school goes through a crisis,
Mhm.
all of the top leadership team is just stuck dealing with the PR of it all and then the student support, faculty support. So um, that's a question I hear all the time. How do you get time for it? And I think it's shifting to prevention.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think it's real quick for Bridget and I to answer that last question in the chat, Trisha. It's on Bridget's slide there, but it's true for Friend Central as well. In any given class, graduating class, it's 10 to 20% for Friend Central as well that have a articulated support plan.
Yeah, the question was how many people have learning plans or accommodations, and we're at about school-wide, we're about 13 this year.
Mhm. So there you go, 10 to 20. Um, okay, I'm gonna keep us moving because I think now what I'd like Bridget and Frederick to talk about is how is this model scaffolded through some of the actions that they're taking? One of the things that some of you have mentioned is how do you coordinate? How do you communicate across the staff. And so I'd like Bridget and Frederick to kind of talk about how do these parts of the pyramid come to life in practice in the way they're using IntelliSpark.
Sure. So IntelliSpark is a communication platform that has profiles for all the kids. I think Patricia's going to show you some screenshots later. But it's really a way for in real time teachers to be able to give updates on kids. And so one of the things we found is that there were teachers who were having huge success with some students that a bunch of other teachers were struggling with. And so we would go and we would have a meeting, and then we would have another meeting where we shared it out and we talked about it. And here, if you look at that all, if this is something that is sort of first tier, no big deal, it's something that could happen to any student, we would just write a note in IntelliSpark. So the kid's missing an assignment, or more likely, like the kid is now missing 2 assignments, something's going on. We don't want it to get overwhelming, right? Or kid came in today and said that their dog died and they're having a really hard day. The first teacher who hears that writes it in, and then teachers can be notified, oh, this kid needs a little extra support today, right? And what we have found really successful is, hey, we've started using this organizational chart with this kid in our class, and it's really working, and they make an attachment of it. So this is something that's just sort of standard teaching interactions. A flag is something that you might have in the past written an email about, right? So a kid does some sort of behavioral thing. A kid is now missing 4 or 5 assignments. So we've noted the kid's missing some assignments. Now they're missing 4 or 5 and it's happening. You want to know if it's happening in multiple classes. Or you're saying something has happened that I really think we as a teaching team need to talk about the kid. Mm-hmm. And then for the few is really when we're going to actually develop an action plan. And so this is how Packer's using it. I think there's many different ways to use it. But this is when we have an outside intervention plan that SST has talked about this kid. We're going to make some referrals. And this is sort of our way of tracking the outside referral communication between the family, the outside specialist, and the school.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. And, I think we believe with IntelliSpark that any student could at some point have that escalation. But every student deserves to be known whether or not they have the escalation. So at the bottom of the pyramid there, if a student's having a tough day because something happened in the family and it's a short-term thing, the more people who know and can address that student in a timely way, in a supportive way, the better. It doesn't mean it's going to escalate to a tier 3, but at least we know where things start. So it is kind of getting on the front end of things. Frederick, is there anything that you want to add, any variations on this theme before we kind of move into some of those pieces that have really helped you?
Yeah, I mean, less of a variation and more, to go to that level one, the all, that note feature is such a great place for if every single student has a conference, right? Parent conference about that student with an advisor, with a teacher. The note section is a great place for that teacher or advisor to summarize that meeting, right? To put something in there to memorialize, if you will, on a particular date, a conversation that has happened, and that happens then year after year, right? And it builds towards something, whether we are a nursery through 12 school or a early years, middle years school, or simply just a high school. It is that time that we're looking at, and that data that shows us, even if it's more qualitative and probably has a bit more work to systematize in terms of its understanding. That note feature is really, really important in terms of how every single student and the adults that they interact with should be finding a way to put something in there about that student. That's not problem based either. Like it can be a problem, right? But it also can be a strength. And there are other places to celebrate that in Telespark as well. High fives is one of those places. But when we're able to capture that information, we're really creating a strength-based point of view on a student. And when teachers who are experiencing an issue, a concern, a problem, if you will, about that student, their best way to help that student find their solution is to focus in on their strengths. So the levels of this have a tremendous amount of importance, and each one works together from note to flag to action plan.
Mhm. So there are a lot of questions coming in right now, which I appreciate, around matters of sensitivity. You know, tension between what should go in there. Are there levels of control? Do nurses and counselors write in this platform? And how is confidentiality managed? So I'm going to move into some images. And I'm actually going to move right over here into notes. And I would ask if Bridget and Frederick can kind of speak to who uses IntelliSpark, how are you managing confidentiality? This is something I will just say from an IntelliSpark side. Um, you know, we've been at this for over 20 years and are very appreciative of how critical student data privacy is. So we've actually built it with this in mind, the need to be able to share certain information with certain people very confidently and securely, much more securely than in Google. So if Frederick and Bridget, if you'd like to speak to, here's an example of, you know, notes and how you can share confidentiality or confidentially.
Sure, I can go. So prior to this, we had our nurses and counselors charting in Magnus. So for those of you that are using something like that, and we then had our IT team develop an SST on Magnus, but it was really cumbersome. The like whole process of logging in and and oh my God, someone really wants to get a hold of me. And it was really cumbersome. And so in here, when we got this, you can see the yellow dots next to the SST discussion is something that only sensitive people can see. And so when we adopted IntelliSpark and went through all of the permissions, we made that only for people on SST. So, and obviously the head of school who doesn't sit on SST, but this is like high level admin and people who sit on SST. There are notes like TTM conversation, which that's our teacher team meeting. Teachers are actually there. And this is now just where the dean of that student will take notes, and then everybody can sort of see the notes. And you can see that here they talked about this kid twice, right? So then they have this running record of how many times this kid comes up on TTM. And that's something that teachers can see. And then you also have the ability to make teams. So our mental health team said, we actually don't feel comfortable with everyone on SST seeing what we're talking about. And so IntelliSpark created another group of privacy, which only the mental health team can see those notes. And so there's different layers of privacy to make sure that people aren't having access to more information than they need.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to actually, and right here you can see an example of, and I will say thank you, Bridget. These are actually some images from their account, obviously blurred and de-identified, but you can see where there are conversations happening asynchronously. So can you talk a little bit about why this is impactful, Bridget, the ability to reply?
So once you make a note on a kid, so let's say we talk about a kid in SST and we say, yes, that we're going to recommend for a neuropsych. And then you can actually reply in there. You can see that someone on our team named Charlie sent an evaluator names to mom. You can see lower down, we spoke with mom about next steps, right? And so now you have a running track record of the communication with the family and the supports that are being given, right? So let's say there was a behavioral issue. It could be the same thing. So a teacher writes a behavior note and says, I sent the kid to the middle school office. Then the dean could say, had this conversation, whatever, has to spend next free period with me, whatever. And so you're seeing in real time sort of the intervention steps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Next, I wanted to actually kind of going a little bit in reverse here. Actually, I'll go forward here. This can you talk a little bit about the flag? So we do have a lot, a major focus for our independent school partners has been this managing the referral process and the implementation of supports. So can you talk about how you're using this with SST kind of based on these visuals, Bridget?
Yeah, and there was a question actually put in the Q&A about mental health. So
Mhm.
this is our flag for mental health. So social emotional concern. If a teacher has a concern about somebody's social or emotional state, and they can raise this flag, and you'll see that it's automatically assigned to our school counselor, our school psychologist, myself, and our director of student support. So the second a teacher or adult fills that out, we get notified in our email that's been raised. And so then nobody else can see that information except for us.
Mhm. Mhm. And you can see here that just above those colored bubbles, within that flag, that referral, they could add notes, they could add a specific kind of support that they're putting in place, they can put an action in place. And even though the person who raised the flag, let's say it's a classroom teacher, they wouldn't be able to see this whole history, but when this flag gets closed because it's been addressed, they will automatically get notified. If they wanted to ask more questions, they could certainly follow up and ask questions, but they will get notified automatically that this has been addressed and there is a plan in place.
And the practice that we have is if we talk about them in SST, I will write a note, student was discussed in SST, so that people know that we're addressing it and having these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And Frederick, I know, so here's an example of where a support, you can create your own custom list of supports, your own referral titles. Um, Frederick, how are you using this for your learning plans?
Yeah, this has been a real game changer for me in terms of my own time. Having teachers access, we call them ed plans at Friend Central, but individualized learning plans. Well, we have all different names for them, but you know, what are often called 504s or IEPs in the public sphere. Um, Having them live or having them accessible to teachers through IntelliSpark is so helpful because IntelliSpark and Veracross, which is our student information system, I believe, Bridget, you also use Veracross? Yeah.
Yep.
And many of you probably attending today also use Veracross or another student information system. These platforms talk to each other. So because teachers are assigned to a student's profile as a member of their team, so any current teacher of a student, they have access to that ed plan, and nobody else has access to that student's ed plan except for people who are also on their team, whether it's a team member because you're an academic teacher or you've been placed on that student's team um, directly through IntelliSpark instead of directly through the communication between Veracross and IntelliSpark.
Mhm.
So I used to have to do this manually in Google Drive, and it took a lot of time. And that for me, you know, along with all of the other ways we used to use Google Drive to capture information on students and then not have it be as readily as accessible, to be able to link to Google Drive in IntelliSpark rather seamlessly. I mean, it's like 2 clicks, and I can attach a Google document there, and with permissions, have it be secure in a way that I never could before. So we use the support section um, not only for ed plans, we will also post consent to exchange information forms there so we know that we have received forms, whether it's ours or an outside clinician's form, so that we know who can communicate with who, particularly at the level 3 that Bridget referred to before when a student is in intensive um, interventions outside of school.
Mhm. And I thought I would show, I'm going to hop around again, but I wanted to also show some examples of this is all customized to the language of your school. And so Frederick, if you can speak to the value of these tags, the customized tags, and
Yeah,
here's an
yeah.
example.
Tags are super important. I mean, even to the point where the limitations of fields in Veracross into IntelliSpark. So some of those limitations right now have to do with gender as it's captured by a parenting adult in Veracross, um, either during registration or on a yearly basis, and what a student might express they want to, um, how they want to be identified. And so we can create a multitude of tags that help our teachers with pronouns, with non-binary identities, and that's just one example. I mean, I think tags in there's 20 different ways that I could talk about tags. Real shortcuts for teachers where they can click on a button that is all of the students they teach, or even individually by the class, and see which ones have extended time on IntelliSpark instead of having to go to what we used to do in the past, which was have a separate document that kind of summarized accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
You do that through tags in a very, very simple way um, that really provides teachers at their fingertips the information that they need.
I'm going to go back to the very first page where it shows an example of a student page. So here's an example of a student hub. Every student has one because they're pulled in through the integration with Veracross or whatever student information system. And up here, right at the top of the page, would be those sample flags, the sample tags, which would help you to see, oh, extended time or whatever tags you may want for your school. If it were a sensitive flag or tag, rather, it would have a yellow dot, and you would know that not everyone could see that tag. So I recognize time has flown and we have about 3 more minutes to today's discussion, which is certainly not enough for everything that we wanted to share. Um, as I said, I will be sharing this out so you can see some more examples. Here is one example of all the different types of custom tags and flags for referrals and supports that are in place at Packer, for example. And those can be used as filters to create a list. Who are all my kids with this support? Who are all of my kids with a certain flag that's been raised today? So you can create these custom lists and monitor. um, I'm going to ask very quickly if Frederick and Bridget can share the value of the weekly digest. What is the digest and why is it so impactful?
So the digest, you get it every Monday, and we surveyed our teachers to see how they felt about Packer, and actually the weekly digest was one of their favorite things. And so it gives them a summary of anybody that they have access to. So basically anybody they teach, any notes that were written on them. And so sometimes you can push a note to somebody saying, hey, this kid's dog died and they're having a terrible morning, and it emails them. If it's something less urgent, they'll just get it in the weekly digest.
Mhm. Um, and so again, information is pushed. You don't have to be in there all the time. Quickly sharing that Bridget was kind enough to share results of a survey. Both schools have implemented only in the last 4 months. So this is fresh data of the first 4 months of impact. And Bridget, if you just want to share kind of what you heard from your 128 staff respondents.
Sure. So we asked how often you use. You can see most of them are using it 1 to 2 times per week. We have some heavy users getting on 3 to 4 times a week and like writing in notes. You can go to the next one.
Mhm.
This is a shortened version of the survey. So I asked, what extent has it supported your work as a teacher? 3 and 4 was on the more impact. And so you can see that it has positively supported their work as a teacher. And how has it made communication more efficient? This was what I was really looking for. That was what teachers were telling us, that communication wasn't efficient. That's why we adopted this. And so I was really pleasantly surprised to see, not surprised, really pleasant results to see so many people feel that the intended result is there. And maybe one more, is there one more?
Yes.
And how do you, to what extent has it allowed you to know your students better? And so 50-ish%, and I want to actually dive in and see what divisions answered this, right? To see where the biggest impact is, because a lot of our advisors have been with kids for 4 years. And so this wouldn't necessarily let them know kids better, right? In the upper school, they already know their kids really well. So I want to dive a little deeper into that data.
Thank you for sharing this. But I thought this was fantastic. And so certainly a tribute to your commitment to, ensuring that people understand how to use it and why. But this is great utilization in the first 4 months. We are at the top of the hour. So there were some great questions that came in. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I first want to thank Bridget and Frederick for sharing so honestly the reality of what it has taken for them to implement their programs, to share where they are and what the challenges are, what the rewards have been, both with integrated student support and in how they're scaffolding that using IntelliSpark. If there are additional questions for IntelliSpark, we do look forward to people reaching out to learn more. And here is our information. We will be sending out the slides and the recording from today that you can share with your teams. But I also wanted to make sure, again, you had the information. Bridget and Frederick have been very willing to also answer questions if there were questions that arose today. I know there were a couple that we didn't get to that maybe we can get back to. If Bridget has a moment, there was a question for somebody about assignments and tracking. And I think that there are things that are probably tracked still in your student information systems that are separate from what is in IntelliSpark. And so, but really a lot of that data will probably still exist in your student information system and learning management system. But here we have the story behind that data. Would that be fair to say, Bridget?
Yep.
Yeah. Are there any, if we have maybe 2 minutes, are there any closing questions or thoughts for Bridget and Frederick today? I'm certainly incredibly appreciative and proud of your work and commend you both.
Sincerely, feel free to reach out by email as well if you have questions about anything about the programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, even questions that people might have in terms of strategies for rollout. I would definitely think of these first 4 months as a soft rollout for Friend Central, with emphasis on upper school. Our middle school, has a plan to start robustly the following year, and lower school the same way. So there's it's an important thing, right? It's an important thing not to overwhelm staff people at your school, and to start using a program and having people gain comfort and then realize all of the different things that it's capable of offering us, but also all of what it helps our students and families with when your students attend a high achieving school.
I think that's exactly right, is that we start with primary pain points and needs, and then we can continue to expand. And I think that your schools have done that brilliantly. You move with your team, just like you meet your students where they are, you meet your staff where they are. And I think our goal is to make this very intuitive and simple, so that this is an enabler and not an obstacle. There are plenty of other challenges during the day, and our goal is not to be one of them. So thank you for saying that, Frederick. And again, thank you, Bridget, for your great examples. And we wish you all a fantastic 2025. And I also would say, please email me if there are other related topics around integrated student support that you might want us to follow up with future webinars on, because as we have a community of practice, we want to make sure you have a chance to engage with each other even more. There may be no presentation, it may just be all be discussion around how people are solving some of these greatest challenges. So please feel free to email those to me, and that will inform our future programming. Thank you all. Have a fantastic day. Take care.
Thank you.